You think you know about concubines? Exotic beauties in opulent palaces, draped in silk, whispered about in secret? Well, buckle up, because the history books left out a crucial and frankly shocking detail: male concubines. From the sprawling, imperial courts of ancient China to the opulent, shadowed harems of the Ottoman Empire, these young men were not just for pleasure, but for profound, demanding service to entire courts, often having to serve dozens of nobles every single day. Forget the softened, sanitized versions of history. You're about to discover the hidden, bizarre, and often brutally tragic reality of these forgotten figures. We're talking about lives of unimaginable luxury, yes, but intertwined with constant degradation, a relentless demand for physical and emotional availability, where a beautiful face and a lithe body could be both a fleeting blessing and a suffocating curse. The very concept challenges our modern understanding of power dynamics, sexuality, and exploitation, peeling back layers of historical narrative to reveal a discomforting truth. Let's start with the most shocking truth. These weren't just isolated anomalies or rare occurrences. In many of the most powerful and sophisticated empires across millennia, the sophisticated courts of the Byzantine Empire, the powerful dynasties of China, the opulent caliphates of the Islamic Golden Age, and even specific periods in European history, the existence of male concubines was an open secret, an integral, if unspoken, part of courtly life and the social fabric of the elite. These boys and young men, often acquired through conquest, purchased from impoverished families struggling to survive, or even sometimes offered by ambitious parents seeking patronage, were meticulously selected not just for their physical attractiveness, but for their delicate features, their youthful innocence, and crucially, their innate ability to be molded, refined, and entirely remade into the perfect companion, the ultimate tool of pleasure and prestige. Imagine being ripped from the only home you've ever known, thrust into a world of unimaginable opulence and rigid hierarchy, then put through an intense, often brutal, training regimen. You were taught exquisite etiquette, how to move with grace, how to play musical instruments to soothe a noble's mood, how to dance with captivating elegance, and of course, how to excel in the more intimate arts of pleasure. Every facet of your personality, every natural inclination, was systematically suppressed and reshaped. Your entire existence became singularly focused on pleasing the powerful, anticipating their desires before they even voiced them, not just one singular master, but often a bewildering revolving door of lords, princes, ministers, and even emperors themselves. The demands were relentless, stretching from dawn till deep into the night, a constant performance of subservience and allure. The stakes were incredibly high. Your very survival, your daily bread, your freedom from torture or banishment, your entire world depended on your ability to satisfy, to never falter, to never displease. You don't learn this in history classes out there. But in some courts, like those described in ancient Roman or Ottoman chronicles, these young men were paraded almost daily in designated areas, sometimes in various stages of undress, almost like livestock or prized possessions for high ranking. Nobles to inspect and then select for their private chambers or even for group activities. Their individual identities were systematically stripped away. Their bodies were not their own. They were commodities, possessions to be used, shared, and ultimately discarded once their youth faded or a new, more exotic face arrived. This wasn't merely a private arrangement. It was often a systemic, institutionalized form of human ownership, justified by the immense power and privilege of the ruling class. On the surface, looking at historical accounts through a modern lens, life for a male concubine could appear almost idyllic, draped in the finest silk robes, adorned with exquisite jewelry, indulging in the most delicate and sumptuous foods, receiving an education in arts, poetry, and philosophy that was denied to most of society. They lived within palatial walls, shielded from the common struggles of everyday life. But beneath that glittering, seductive facade lay a reality of profound, unimaginable physical and psychological torment that went far beyond mere sensual service. We're talking about a level of exploitation, dehumanization, and emotional violence that would make modern human rights advocates reel in horror. A hidden chamber of suffering behind the velvet curtains of power. Let's talk about the sheer, mind-boggling volume of their daily duties. Historical accounts, particularly from Chinese imperial courts, the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, and even some periods within the early modern European aristocracy, describe concubines who were literally expected to be available around the clock, their bodies and time not their own. Some were indeed individual favorites of a single powerful figure, but many, perhaps most, were shared among entire factions of nobles, moving like human chess pieces from one bedchamber to another, sometimes being summoned by multiple patrons in a single night or over the course of a long, demanding day. There was no concept of personal boundaries, no right to refuse, no expectation of privacy. They were on call, constantly, their bodies enduring a ceaseless demand for pleasure. Imagine the relentless physical toll this took. It wasn't just the intimate acts themselves, which could range from gentle companionship to brutal violation. It was the crushing, unending pressure to always perform, to always be desirable, to never show fatigue, pain, or displeasure. Their bodies were not temples, but rather tools, constantly used, often without a shred of consent, care, or consideration for their well-being. The constant physical exertion, coupled with the frequent lack of proper rest, led to a myriad of chronic ailments. Injuries were common, often untreated. Infections were rampant, frequently masked by elaborate cosmetics and powerful pain-numbing concoctions, some of which were addictive and further compounded their misery. Exhaustion wasn't merely a state of tiredness. It was a pervasive, bone-deep weariness that could lead to collapse, but it gets even worse. The psychological impact of such a life was, arguably, even more devastating than the physical. These boys and young men lived in a perpetual, agonizing state of anxiety and terror. Their entire social status, their very lives, were entirely dependent on the arbitrary whims of their patrons' favor. One accidental misstep, one poorly chosen word, one perceived slight, or simply the unavoidable arrival of a newer, younger, even prettier face could mean immediate, devastating consequences. Brutal banishment from the court, public humiliation, agonizing torture, or even swift, brutal execution. They were living, breathing trophies, constantly on display, constantly under the existential threat of being shattered, abandoned, or destroyed at any moment. There was no true security, no genuine affection, only conditional approval that could be rescinded in an instant. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but many male concubines, particularly those who endured years of such service, developed severe and often debilitating mental health issues, chronic depression, crippling anxiety, extreme post-traumatic stress, and even profound psychosis, all direct consequences of the relentless abuse, the constant threat, and the absolute lack of control over their own lives and bodies. Some modern historians and psychologists, examining the limited primary sources and applying contemporary understanding, speculate that widespread drug use, opium, various herbs, or potent alcoholic concoctions was a common, desperate coping mechanism among them, a temporary and ultimately destructive escape from their unbearable reality. Their minds were as caged and brutalized as their bodies. These male concubines weren't just decorative figures for pleasure. They were often deeply, dangerously entangled in the treacherous, cutthroat world of court politics. Their very existence, their unparalleled beauty, and their intimate access to the most powerful figures granted them an unusual, albeit incredibly precarious and double-edged, form of influence, often turning them into unwitting pawns, crucial informants, and even, in rare and terrifying instances, unacknowledged kingmakers. This constant political undercurrent added yet another layer of profound peril to their already precarious and often terrifying lives. Consider, for example, the significant, though often downplayed, role of the Zhao Guan, literally little officials, or minor officials in the imperial courts of Ming and Qing dynasty China. These young men, often eunuchs to ensure their undivided loyalty and prevent the establishment of rival family lines, served as indispensable personal companions to emperors and high-ranking officials, while their ostensible primary role was indeed personal service and intimate companionship. Their constant proximity to the centers of power meant they became privy to every whispered secret, every clandestine meeting, every desperate plea, and every venomous plot circulating within the palace walls. They could carry sensitive messages unseen, subtly influence an emperor's mood or decision-making at a critical juncture, and even inadvertently sway the fate of entire empires simply by being present, listening, and occasionally offering a carefully chosen word in a moment of vulnerability. But here's where it gets truly insane, revealing the depth of their objectification. Powerful nobles and emperors would sometimes gift their favorite concubines to other, more influential figures, not out of genuine generosity or affection, but as a cold, calculating strategic move. It was a potent demonstration of loyalty, a tangible means of currying crucial favor, or even a sophisticated way to insert a trusted spy, an ear within an opponent's household. These beautiful young men were literally reduced to human bargaining, chips traded like valuable livestock or prized material possessions in the brutal, ceaseless game of dynastic power. Their bodies and their presence became currency in a realm where human lives were often less valuable than political leverage. Their lives were, consequently, constantly balanced on a razor's edge. If their patron or master fell from imperial favor or lost a critical political struggle, the concubines often went down with him, their fate inextricably linked to his downfall. They could be swiftly executed for perceived disloyalty, for knowing too many uncomfortable secrets, or simply as a brutal, unambiguous message to their former masters. Rival factions within the court would actively scheme to poison or discredit popular concubines, not just to remove a personal rival, but specifically to weaken their opponent's emotional and political stability, knowing the deep attachment that often formed. The beautiful young man became a convenient, vulnerable target in a larger, deadlier war. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but some concubines who, against all odds, managed to gain significant power, wealth, and influence were often viewed with immense suspicion, burning jealousy, and outright hatred by the traditional court aristocracy and scholarly officials. Their meteoric rises, often attributed to improper influence over their master, almost invariably ended in equally dramatic and often incredibly bloody falls. They were outsiders, seen as corrupting influences, moral stains on the court, and thus easy scapegoats when things inevitably went wrong, their tragic ends serving as a cautionary tale for any who dared to rise too far from such a compromised position. The stories of male concubines are, for the most part, shockingly absent from mainstream historical narratives. Their complex lives, often ending in profound tragedy or utter anonymity, were systematically swept under the rug, deemed an inconvenient, uncomfortable, and morally ambiguous truth. You'd think that such a widespread and enduring practice, integral to powerful courts for centuries, would be openly discussed and analyzed, but their collective legacy is, instead, one of deliberate, almost total historical amnesia. It's a silence that speaks volumes about societal values and who gets to write history. Their endings were, almost without exception, bleak, and often horrifying. Once they lost their youthful looks, their delicate features began to fade. Or, most critically, their powerful patrons' favor shifted. They were ruthlessly discarded. Some were summarily banished from court, sent to remote, desolate monasteries, their luxurious robes replaced by rough peasant cloth. Others were condemned to menial labor, forced to live out their days in obscurity and poverty, a stark contrast to their former opulence. Many simply vanished from all records, their fates unknown, their bodies perhaps left to rot in unmarked graves. The most unfortunate among them faced swift, brutal, and often violent deaths, sometimes at the hands of jealous rivals within the court, other times by vengeful family members seeking to erase the shame they represented, or even, in a terrifying betrayal, at the hands of their former lovers who needed to eliminate an inconvenient witness to their own transgressions or shifting alliances. Consider the profound rarity of their authentic voices within historical records. What little we know about them often comes filtered through the prejudiced lenses of traditional chroniclers, often conservative scholars or officials who viewed their existence as inherently immoral, decadent, or deviant. Their personal experiences, their innermost thoughts, their genuine hopes and devastating fears, their true relationships, these are almost entirely lost to time, swallowed by the silence of history. They were primarily objects, seen, used, and then, without ceremony, discarded and forgotten, their humanity stripped away, even in the act of being recorded. The fundamental reason for this profound historical erasure is simple, yet powerful: profound societal discomfort. Throughout much of history, and particularly in cultures that emphasized procreation and rigid gender roles, homosexuality, or indeed any form of non-procreative sexuality, was often deeply stigmatized, even when it was openly, if discreetly, practiced by the elite. Acknowledging the widespread and institutionalized presence of male concubines would have fundamentally challenged and irrevocably complicated traditional notions of masculinity, gender roles, power structures, and accepted morality. It was far easier, far more convenient, and far less threatening to the established order to simply pretend they didn't exist, to bury their stories deep within obscure texts, or to deliberately omit them from official chronicles, thus cleansing the historical narrative of an inconvenient truth. So there you have it, the shocking untold truth of male concubines. Not merely passive figures of pleasure, but men, often mere boys, forced into lives of relentless, unending service, enduring constant physical and psychological demands, often to dozens of powerful nobles every single day. Their erased stories are a chilling, potent reminder of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, how human beings can be commodified and exploited to the furthest extent, and how history itself can be meticulously manipulated to hide uncomfortable yet vital truths about human nature and society. If these disturbing, hidden historical facts made you question everything you thought you knew about the opulent past, maybe hit that subscribe button, because there are plenty more horrifying truths that textbooks conveniently leave out, obscured by the selective memory of history. And trust me, you haven't heard anything yet.